Thank you for taking the time to see that incredible poem put together by our city poet, Vanessa Kisulu, through which we really wanted to capture this idea of hope, that it's not just some kind of abstract idea like what I think is optimism, but hope grapples with the idea that actually we suffer sometimes. And it's through coming through those trials that we really find our perseverance, character, and yet a bit of hope. And that's the thing that sees us through. But I've been asked to just share a few words on building a resilient future, building a resilient economy. So first off, just the scale of the challenge that we face. And we know this COVID is just something that's taken us by huge surprise. I really get a sense of a kind of a humbling, actually. I think most crises we face, we think someone somewhere can sort it out, be it a migration crisis, poverty. We always think that there's someone in a room somewhere and with the solutions within policy reach. But this is perhaps one of the first times, certainly in my lifetime, where actually many of us are thinking no one anywhere actually has power over this. And it's a warning for us that we are not in ultimate command and control over our planet, and we need to respect it, and we need to respect each other before events overtake us. 14 million cases worldwide, 500,000 deaths worldwide. The biggest economic hit facing us perhaps in 300 years. In Bristol, this looks like about 1,300 cases. It looks on our ground like businesses fearing they won't survive. Only 11% of small businesses between 5 and 9 staff believing they could survive more than 6 months. Over 50% reporting lost orders and cash flow issues. Unemployment in the city of Bristol is pretty good overall. And I say overall because that's the overall number. We have major inequalities in Bristol. But it's at 3.9% at the moment. It looks about 10,000 people. If you take that up to 10% unemployment, as some are predicting, that's 26,000 people on a population of 460,000. Blanchflower and Bell, two economists, are suggesting we could go up to 20% unemployment. In Bristol, that'd be 50,000 people out of a population of 460,000. So we can see the scale of the challenge that lays before us. A couple of personal reflections on that challenge. One is that we've defined this challenge primarily as a National Health Service crisis, and I think that's wrong, or at least it's not the full story. And so all the attention was put into Nightingale hospitals and so forth, totally, absolutely leaving out the public health understanding of the need for local government and public services and the wider determinants of health, the consequences of increased levels of domestic violence, the trauma, the emotional, the bereavement, the lost communities. Simply looking at it through a health service lens has left so much off the table, and actually has underpinned, I think, the government's kind of defining a way of local government need in the face of this and a crisis of local government. So we do need to, I think, reframe this to see that that what we are doing at the moment is the need to tackle the immediate health challenge of the virus itself. But the way we are tackling it in itself will produce a health crisis coming along because of those social determinants that we are feeding into, the levels of unemployment and so forth. My second is that this is in line with what I said at the beginning. This is a bit of a warning. We face a shock right now, but it's one that we can come out the other end of with a degree of hope. If we don't get our act together and tackle this idea of resilient economic development coming off the bat, the next crisis we face might be one in which we cannot actually see hope coming up. If we were to go past tipping point on climate change, we would simply be in harm minimization with disastrous consequences for our own cities in the UK, across the global north, but particularly the global south. And I'm involved in a group called the Mayor's Migration Council, and we're looking at 200 climate-driven migrants by the middle of this century. So you can see all the dynamics that become kicking into play if we pass that tipping point. So we've got to sort ourselves out. So on sustainable, how do I understand it? I just, a couple of reflections before going on to some more points. First off, it does mean building a more resilient society and economy, and it means building a lower impact society and economy. So we need to be more resilient to future shocks, but we need to find a way of working that reduces the contribution we make to the potential of future shocks, be they climate, social, or economic. So if I think of the social sustainability element of this, one is it's got to be about individual people. This has been absent. We are facing issues of trauma, bereavement, legacy, mental health, the echoes of domestic violence, all those things in our society that we cannot just plaster over as we plow forward into big grants to big sectors. We got to support our economic sectors, but we have to think about people within that mix too. And it's also about human relationships. While the economy's been pulled apart, how can we build back better, to coin a phrase, in a way that actually tackles some of the underlying drivers that are giving us Black Lives Matter? And by that, it is about inequalities in the criminal justice system, but it's about the everyday systems that mean that people with brown skin, people from poor backgrounds are born with a lower life expectancy, destined to become sick before others, destined to get a poor outcome from an education system, disproportionately likely to end up in criminal justice system or in mental health institutions. These are the everyday systemic inequalities that are driven into our society. We've got to sort out the human relationships that sit at the center of that. On the economy, we need certainty. When I talk about a sustainable economy, it is about environmental sustainability, but it's about jobs that people can depend on. And that's not just about, they know they're going to be going to the face of the work every day, but they're going to get a wage through which they can actually live and pay their bills and feed their children. We need to come up with a way of restructuring our economy so that it actually delivers life rather than extracts life. It means changing the very nature of the way we do business. And we shouldn't have an economy where we do economic growth and then we have to chase after the negative consequences of that economic growth with social policy. That's allowing business to externalize the costs, paying below living wage. Then we come across with a benefit system trying to make up for that, or we've come up with other support systems to make up for the fact that people are paid poverty wages and can't, put food on the table, feed, pay their bills. We have to do something fundamentally different. The environmental point speaks for itself. We cannot go forward in a way that kills the planet. One of the things I've been pressing the government to do on that front that ties up into the economy is bringing forward that investment on green infrastructure right here, right now. If you give me predictability as a local authority leader, and I know that you are going to back our green infrastructure, back our mass transit system, retrofit our homes, help us insulate our public sector buildings, decarbonize energy, I will begin now lining up that skills pipeline. I will begin now lining up our local small businesses to get those contracts. If you leave us on the back foot, give us 6 months notice, you will build in increased likelihood of economic exclusion from whatever uptick comes. One of my real fears on that is that, again, that the economic downturn is going to hit poor people hardest and fastest. They will also be the least well placed to benefit from any uptick when it comes. Inequalities are going to be compounded. We have to be intentional about redressing that. The last area I'll talk about sustainability is about local government. National government is failing. It's about failure of ideas, but it's also about failure of structures. Centralizing power behind podiums in Whitehall and Westminster and giving one-size-fits-all solutions just is not working. It's not even a case of just including for being nice. It's just understanding the way places work, particularly the country. Government are mistaking centralization and control for leadership. They're not the same thing. We're coming off the back of 10 years of austerity, and now we've got increased costs and lost revenue that are putting local governments on the edge. If I go back to the social element, we do social care, we drive childcare. If a local government disappears, there will be no recovery, or at least it'll be a lot weaker than it should be, and it will certainly be a lot less just. What we are on the edge of at the moment in this country, I believe, is one of the biggest centralizations of power that we have seen in decades, and it's happening invisibly, and we've got to get ahead of it. It's not just, it will undermine lives, and it is not good for our democracy. Last thing I would just add is the place of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'd ask you to consider that. The danger is that in the dash for growth, we will have a values-free economic growth approach. We cannot afford that right now. The Sustainable Development Goals offer us a framework to put values into our economic recovery, from life on land, life on sea, climate, poverty, women's rights, quality of democracy, decent work. I think we need to put the SDGs at the heart of what we do. We need to press national government, but also remembering that the SDGs will ultimately be delivered at the local place, which again stresses the need for local government and local governance, not the centralisation of power. And I'd love to see us as a party really becoming the champion of the SDGs, taking them out of DVID and the Foreign Office and actually putting them into the heart of our own domestic policy as well. I think that'd be very enlightening to do so. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marvin. Thank you for joining us from Bristol, not that far from where I am now at the moment as well. Our next speaker needs no introduction, really. She became the first woman ever to hold the post of TUC General Secretary in 2013. Please welcome Frances O'Grady.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you to Nigel and the whole Tolpuddle team, including, of course, the Southwest region, for organising what I hope is a really big festival and big mass meeting. I have to say that I miss the scenery, I miss the beautiful vision as you stand on that platform and look out across the hills, and I miss the beautiful crowd. But I'm trying to get into the spirit of Tolpuddle. I've got the t-shirt on, I've got the hair. The only thing I'm missing is a big glass of Tolpuddle cider. I also want to add my welcome to everybody who's joining us, but particularly to the 200,000 new extra trade union members who have joined our movement over the last 2 years. That is an incredible achievement from our reps, from our organisers, and increasingly from our digital campaigners too, because more and more people are joining online. I want to send our union love and solidarity to workers in the UK and around the world. And just to remember, really, that this crisis has brought out the best and the worst. And I want to start with the best. 3 special mentions. First up, I would like to, on behalf of the trade union movement, thank Marcus Rashford, Premiership footballer, not my team, but nevertheless, he's also a PFA member, and he has backed our education unions to fight a fantastic fight and win free school meals over the summer for the kids who need them, so that no child should go hungry over the holidays. I think that is a fantastic achievement. Secondly, I want to send all our solidarity to workers and union members in Tower Hamlets, at British Airways, Tata Steel, and all workers who are fighting to defend their jobs and stop the pay cuts, because we've seen too many employers opportunistically looking to sack workers and rehire them on worse terms and conditions. So I am sending our solidarity to all those workers who are standing up for the right to decent treatment. And finally, of course, I want to send our union love to Britain's 10 million key workers. Now, it shouldn't have taken a pandemic to work out that some of the most important jobs in society are paid the least. In the NHS and care system, of course, but also in our supermarkets, delivery drivers, transport workers, civil servants and local government workers. And yet 4 million of them earn less than £10 an hour. I think that's a disgrace. And I know that you will support me when I say the best way to thank our key workers is to give them a pay rise. So we'll be fighting hard for that, and we know that we can count on you. Now, I'm very conscious that for many of us, these have been the toughest of times. There will be people watching today who may have suffered bereavements or suffered with their own health or that of their family. And, you know, the government tried to say that we were all in it together, and it's all too evident that we certainly won't. Half of all deaths from this horrible virus have been in care homes. And I think that says something very deep and profound and terrible about how much residents in care homes, but also the dedicated staff who look after them, how little they are valued for what they do. We know that Black and ethnic minority workers, much more likely to die or to suffer ill health because of this virus. Some people try and say it's about special health problems, but the truth is staring us in the face that because of racism, Black and ethnic minority people are too often ghettoized into jobs that are more exposed to the virus, into working practices that are more dangerous, and onto contracts that are insecure. You know, one of the key issues in our care homes was care staff who were on agency contracts moving from home to home. So for goodness sake, it's not just wrong and immoral to have people on insecure contracts. It is a public health hazard, and we must never again accept that people are on those 0 hours contracts. And of course, when it comes to not just losing lives, but losing livelihoods, then look who's on the front line of that. And it's young women in particular who are currently facing the worst of the job losses. So our economy is in trouble because our public health system is in trouble. And the UK has one of the worst death rates in Europe. But the tragedy is that it didn't have to be this way. We all know that one of the reasons we're in trouble is because we had years and years and years of deep austerity cuts that left our public services ill prepared. We know we've got an incompetent government that was slow to lock down and slow to act. And more than that, the hypocrisy, the double standards, the one rule for them, another for the rest of us, when some people apparently can break the rules in order to test their eyesight, traveling around the country when they shouldn't have been. And then that cruel fiasco on PPE that ended up with care workers, low paid, insecure, but dedicated to their jobs. Our care workers wrapping themselves in black bin liners to try and protect themselves because they didn't have access to proper PPE. And I know that you will join me in saying never, never again. So we know that the government has messed up big time, ordering people back to work when they haven't got the test and trace system working properly, cutting safety enforcement and inspectors, and then wondering why we're getting these outbreaks in meat packing firms, farms, and fast fashion, attacking trade unions when trade unions are the only way, the best way. The evidence is clear. Our health and safety reps keep people safe at work. And so any rational government would be asking our health and safety reps into workplaces and supporting them and backing them to do the brilliant job that they do. So it is costing, this mess up is costing our economy dear, and we are now facing mass unemployment. But I have to say, I do not believe that is inevitable. I am very proud of the way that our unions have pulled together and risen to the challenge. I'm proud of the way that manufacturing unions are backed by our NHS unions were the first, before employers, they were the first ones to make that call, Unite and other manufacturing unions. They made that call that we should switch production in manufacturing to PPE and to ventilators because those workers knew what needed to happen and they wanted to get on with the job. I'm proud of the fact that together, the TUC and unions, and be clear about this, it wouldn't have happened without us. We fought, we pressed, we argued, we influenced, and we won a job subsidy scheme that has protected 12 million workers, employed and self-employed, has made sure that they got at least 80% of their wages while furloughed. And of course, when it came to the government safety guidelines, frankly, we exposed them as a scandal. They didn't even mention PPE. There was a big blank space. They didn't mention union health and safety reps. They didn't mention a worker's right not to work in dangerous circumstances. We got those rewritten and we won millions to pump into health and safety enforcement. Now the government wants us all to go back to business as usual. But I think the truth, brothers and sisters, is that capitalism is not working, and we need a new economy that is fair, that is green, and that puts working people and labour, the dignity of labour, at its heart. And our job now, we've got to defend the jobs we've got. We need targeted support. Instead of ending the furlough scheme in October, the government should be getting around the table with unions and employers to figure out how we target support to defend jobs. And if that means taking golden shares or taking public ownership, then the government must be ready to do that. But I want something for something. If we're going to have bailouts, it can't be for companies to squirrel away money into tax havens or hand out generous bonuses in the boardroom while treat workers to pay cuts. We've got to have something for something, but we've got to be ready to step in. We've got to create new jobs, not Mickey Mouse jobs, but decent jobs, particularly for young people, with proper training, real training off the job, and paid at least the real living wage. And we've got to invest for the future. You know, we hear that the government has made all these announcements. They turn out to be reheated. We need serious investment for the future, because there is so much good work that needs to be done, from building council homes to greening our transport system to investing in our public services so they are fit for working people, fit for the 21st century. So we can't take our foot off the pedal. And the best way, the only way I know to defend working people is to build our trade union movement. And I know that it's tough. I know a lot of reps and officers are facing redundancies, and it can feel like, how can we do that and build our movement? But I tell you, the only way we will win is if we grow and strengthen our organisation. Union leaders in the TUC have made a pledge that they will put organising as our number one. And I think that is the best way to honour the Tolpuddle Martyrs. That's what they did. They went against the odds. They were prepared to sacrifice everything. They knew that only by standing together could we win fairness, dignity, decency, and freedom. So I hope all of us, let's join together. Let's take that pledge that we will organise and we will win. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
Thank you so much, Frances. Really hopeful words, inspiring words, and we are all here together with you. So thank you. And over to our next speaker. In 2015, she became the first female member of Parliament in the 180-year history of her Ashton-under-Lyne constituency. She then went on to hold the position of Shadow Pension Minister before becoming a member of the Shadow Cabinet as Shadow Secretary for State for Education, and now Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Party Chair, Shadow First Secretary of State and National Campaign Coordinator. Welcome to Angela Rayner.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. And what a lineup to follow, Marvin and Frances. It's an absolute honour to follow them, and it's great to be back here, and thanks Nigel for organising this Zoom Tolpuddle. And I'm really sorry to all the participants, because I'll say in advance I'm much better when you hear me on the cider. So hopefully next year you'll invite me back and we'll be able to be in the sunshine in the southwest and supping some of that lovely cider as well, because networking is part of our movement and part of what we do as well. And I grew up in the trade union movement. I was born in Stockport but raised in the trade union movement. As you can tell by my twang, I'm a Mancunian. And it was my first time in Tolpuddle last year, because I'm often at the gala and then we normally have conferences around that time. So it's always been difficult for me to get to Tolpuddle, but it was the most memorable thing I'd done, and I got such a warm welcome. So if this is your first Tolpuddle, then make sure you go back next year and you see it in the flesh, because it's an experience that if you're in the trade union movement, it's an experience you must experience in the flesh as well. And I just want to start with the words of Frederick Douglass. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Now, Frederick Douglass was an escaped slave and an anti-slavery campaigner, and he was 16 years old in 1834 when the Tolpuddle Martyrs were arrested. We all know that the Martyrs were convicted of taking an illegal oath, but the real crime, in the eyes of the political establishment and the landowning upper class of the time, was that they formed a trade union to protect themselves. They'd formed a union and said no to pay cuts, and they wouldn't work for less than 10 shillings a week. This year, what Frederick Douglass said over 150 years ago took a renewed significance, I think, when George Floyd was killed by a police officer. And all over the world, people took to the streets to say that Black lives matter. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. That was true for the Tolpuddle Martyrs, and it is true today for the trade union and labour movement, and everyone fighting against racism and discrimination. Power concedes nothing without a demand. The 8-hour day wasn't given to us by generosity of the bosses. The 5-day working week wasn't handed down to us upon high. Equal pay, holiday pay, sick pay, maternity pay, none of these rights that we've taken for granted today were conceded by an act of kindness. They were fought for, and they were hard won by trade unionists. Tolpuddle, to me, is an absolute inspiration for a generation who are fighting against injustices and oppression today, and it always will be. And we always have to remember our roots and where we come from. And the story of the Tolpuddle Martyrs and the campaign that liberated them and brought them home inspires us all to fight on. And it's inspired generations before us and will inspire generations to come. Now, both Marvin and Francis have talked about the things that we could be doing now, the things that we must demand now, especially in these most difficult of times, because we stand on the shoulders of giants in our movement. So for me, Tolpuddle is about rejuvenating ourselves, giving ourselves that bit of energy boost that we need, that solidarity and unity when we come together and we say no more, and we stand up and we demand better for those people that protect us and look after us, and those workers that are there for us and have given us the legacy that we've got today. As Francis said, COVID has affected people in care homes. Now, if you think about the generation of those in care homes, and I started my career off working in a care home. I was a care worker on a 0-hour contract at the start when I joined a trade union. When you think about those people that are in those care homes, they're that generation that gave us the National Health Service. They're that generation that fought that war. They're that generation that built the welfare state that enabled us to demand the furlough scheme, the job retention scheme. They're that generation that gave us social council housing. And they're that generation that said every child deserves an education and deserves a start in life. And when you think about what this government have done, they seeded COVID into that care home. They gave those frontline workers no defence against what was coming, the onslaught. And they must answer to that. But more so, they've got to start listening to the people on the front line, to the bereaved families who me and Keir met this week, who have said, more than anything, that they don't want any family to go through what they've been through if it can be prevented. And there's lots that the government can be doing now, like test, track and trace, which they gave up on in March and are only just pushing forward now. There's so many gaps in the employment system now. We know, for example, that there's already over 2.5 million people in the claimant count already for unemployment. And 9 million jobs have been supported by the furlough scheme. As Marvin said, if the government doesn't plan ahead now, then we risk a generation like in the 80s written off of young people not having the opportunities. And we need decent jobs that pay decent wages, because when people get paid a decent wage, they can afford to shop and they can afford to buy things in their local community, which will support our local businesses as well. But if we want an economy that's sustainable, that protects our planet and takes on the new technologies of the future, the government have to have the aspirations to support those start-up technologies and those green energy jobs. This government have been left wanting, too slow to respond. And now is the time for them to listen and to do what's right by the people of Britain. Now, we've always been a party and a movement for the working class of this country. And I know that people get often frustrated with our movement. I've been in it 20 years now. It took me on as a young member, can you believe it? And now I'm a grandma, as I like to say, rather than a grandma. And in all those years, I can safely say I've had my ups and downs in our great movement. But to me, it's a family. And at times, families get frustrated with each other. We fall out, we squabble. But when times are hard, when people feel under attack, families bond together. They come together and they look after each other. That, to me, is what the Tolpuddle Martyrs taught us. Now's the time for us to come together to build that future that our young generation deserve and protect that generation now who gave us the society in which we are privileged enough to enjoy today. So thank you so much for being here at Tolpuddle. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you to listening to me. And I hope to see you in the flesh at Tolpuddle next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, and see you all in Tolpuddle next year.